Hello students, today we shall start our subject computer science. Before we go to the topic, we shall just recall whatever we have seen last year. Let us just go through the structure of our C++ program. Unless we recall it, it may be difficult for us to continue with the next topic. That's why let's go to the structure of C++. As you all aware, it is having many sections in it. The first section is comments or documentation, where we are going to write the remarks, like program to find out area of a rectangle or square, etc. Then comes the linker section, where usually we will write the header files. The common header file or the compulsory header file that we need to write in all the programs is iostream.h, #include iostream.h. Whereas the first one, comments or documentation, is not compulsory or it's not mandatory, but we need to write the linker section in all the programs. Then comes the definition section, like #define pi 3.1415. Even this section is also not compulsory. Then comes the global declaration section. Again, this section is also not compulsory. If we want a particular variable, that is the global variable, then we will write or declare some of the variables here. Of course, that will come into picture only when we have different functions. Then void main, where the actual program begins. Open the flower bracket, then declare the variables. Before using any of the variable, we need to declare it. What type of data or data type, then the variable we have to write. Which are the different data types, fundamental data types? Integer, float, double, character. Then we are going to write the programs or the statements here. After writing all the statements, which is called as executable statements, number of statements here depends on the complexity of the programs. It may be having only some 10 lines of code or more than that, maybe 100 lines of code. Then close the program with closing flower bracket. Then if at all our program is having some functions in it, then our program may be having subroutine section or function section. Again, here also, how many functions we are going to write, it depends on the complexity of the program. If the program is a very simple program, it may be having only one or two functions, which are represented as f1, that is function 1, and f2 stands for function 2, or it may be having n number of functions in it. Again, it depends on the program. We may not have this section at all. In many of the programs that we initially written in the first year, we didn't have this particular section, only this part we had. So which are compulsory sections? Linker section, void main, declaration, executable statements. This part has to be written within opening flower bracket and closing flower bracket. So one simple program we shall write, just to display something. We shall write with #include iostream.h, which is that is the linker section. Then we shall skip these two sections. Directly we shall come to void main. We shall declare a variable. Let it be integer. We shall write int a, or we shall write it as n1, which stands for first value, and n2 second value or second number. Then we shall write the total, that is sum. So we have declared the variables, that is declaration section. Here they are integers, that means the numbers without any fraction in it. Then comes the executable statements. We shall write cout, enter two numbers. Cin, that is to input n1, second number n2, then sum is equal to n1 plus n2. Display the sum, Cout, total is equal to, that is this sum, and close it. This is a simple program written in C++ where we have not included the comments, definition and global declaration section. Moving further, we shall just try to recall the syntax of a function, because in the second year all the programs will be having the functions. So what is the syntax of a function? It starts with return type specifier, I will write it as return type. Then comes function name, then argument list. Again, open the flower bracket, local variable declaration, then statements. Instead of writing statement 1, statement 2, etc., we have written it as statements. Towards the end, return expression or a variable. Now here, what is a return type? We know about the fundamental data types, which are those integer, float, double, character or void. What is void? If we are not going to return any value, if there is nothing is there, then it is void. Otherwise, it will be either integer, float, that is a fraction, double or the character. So return type specifier, usually from the main, somewhere in the main we will call a function. So from the function, suppose this is the function, control will be transferred to this particular function and the statements in the function will get executed. Then again from the function, the control will be transferred back to the place to where earlier the control was transferred to the function. So from the main, the control will be transferred to the function when this function is called. Then the statements in the function will get executed one after the other. When it reaches the end, control will be transferred back to the main. So when the control is transferred from the main to the function, it may carry some values with it for the calculation purpose. So in the function, some calculation we will do. Again, when the control comes back to the main from the function, it will carry some value with it. How many values it will return? Only one value. And how many values from the main to the function can be transferred? Any number of values. So a function can return a single value, whereas from the main, when the function is called, any number of arguments can be passed. So when the control is transferred back from the function to the main, what type of the data that will be transferred back? That is return type specifier or return type, which could be either integer, float, double, character or void. If it doesn't return any value back, then it will be void, or it will be any one among these four. Then comes the function name. So what is a function name here? A program which we have written can contain, just now we have seen, it can contain n number of functions. So any number of functions it can have. That's why we need to have different names to the different functions. So again it will be user defined name. User defined name. Then comes the argument list. What's the argument list? Argument list is the variable list. As we just now we have seen, any number of arguments can be passed to a function. So all the values need to be declared along with the data type. Suppose we are passing two integer values. If it is a and b, then we need to write int a comma int b. Okay, then after that, some of the values we might have passed, or in some of the cases this will be empty or it will be void. If you are not passing any value to the function, even that case is also possible. In that case it will be empty. We will write only the function name and brackets we will write. So after that, for the calculation purpose, we may require some more variables here. So if at all we require some more variables, those variables also need to be mentioned here along with the data type. Then calculation, again number of statements will be there. After completing the calculation, whatever value we have calculated, that need to be written back to the main. So we will write return the variable name, or in some of the cases it will be written just an expression. So again here, if it is an expression, in that case also the value will be calculated and that will be written back. One simple example we shall see for this type of program. It's just a recall of the last year program. Header files we will write hash include iostream.h, then void main int first number n1, second number n2, then sum, cout, enter two values, cin n1 n2, then variable sum is equal to, let us take the function name as total and we shall pass the value n1 n2. This is the function name, and the argument list is n1 and n2, which we have declared here, which are of type integer. Then towards the end we shall just have a message total, which is a message is sum, and close it. Now we need to write the function we shall write here. So now just recall the syntax. It says that it has to start with return type, then comes the function name, which is total, then argument list. Arguments are two, which are of type integer. So we are passing two integer values. We are going to add those integer values. When we are going to add two integer values, again we are going to get an answer which will be of type integer only. It cannot be float. So return type will be integer. Reason is that we are going to add two integer values. When we add two integer values, again we are going to get a total of type integer only. Suppose one of the variable was integer and the other variable was float, then return type will be float. That's why integer, function name is total, then argument list n1 and n2. These are integers here. That's why we need to write integer. Let us write it as x and integer y. Suppose we write n1 and n2 here also, it's okay. But this n1, if you write n1 here and n2 here, this n1 will be different and this n1 will be different, because this n1 is local to this main and this n1 will be local to this total. If you write x and y, what happens? Now the value of n1 will be given to x and the value of n2 will be given to y. Then local variable declaration, if at all required, we can write it as int z. Then z is equal to, we have to add those two values. So we are not going to write n1 plus n2, because we have written it as x and y. We need to use these variables only. So we shall write z is equal to x plus y. Only one statement for the calculation purpose. Now return. What we have to return? The final answer we have to return. Which is the final answer? That is z. Semicolon. And close this. Now how it will get executed? Whether the entire program will be executed first, then this one? No. The statement from here, it will start executing one after the other. We will enter the value of n1 and n2. Here comes a function total, which is written somewhere else. So when the compiler or the control comes here, the control will be transferred from here to this particular function. When the control is transferred from here to here, along with it, it also carries two variables n1 and n2, which will be given to x and y. The value of n1 and n2 will be there as it is. It will be given to x and y. Then one more variable z is declared. X and y are added up and stored in the variable z, and that is returned. And when we are returning back, where the control will be transferred back? It will be transferred back from where the control was transferred earlier to the function. So the value of z will be stored in sum. Then that particular variable sum will be displayed here. This is how a particular function will get executed. Here we are having only one function total. In the same program, we can have one more function, difference. So we can write int difference, int x into y. We can write z is equal to x minus y. Written z also we can write. So in that case, we are having two functions. So any number of functions we can write. It was just a recall of how a particular C++ program works and how a function works. Here in the second year, we are having a concept, or we are going to begin our concept, classes and objects. Classes and objects, in all the programs, we are having many functions. That's why it is important for us to understand how a function works. Now coming to the topic, classes and objects. What is a class? In general, or in real life, we can talk about a class of animals, or we can talk about a class of birds, or in the college itself, we can talk about the class PCMC, second year PCMC, second year SCBA, or second year ECBA. We are having different classes. Why it is called as a class here? Because here we are having some of the common characteristics. We shall come to the topic now, classes and objects. So what is a class? When we look into the definition, what is a class? Class is a user-defined data type. It is a user-defined data type. What is a user-defined data type? We know about fundamental data types. User-defined data types are made up of from fundamental data types. So it's a user-defined data type that contain data members and the objects. Coming to the same example of the class, suppose it is second PCMC or second SCBA or second ECBA. When we consider a particular class, if you look at the subjects, if it is secondary PCMC, subject is physics, chemistry, maths, computer science, and the languages. If it is SCBA, statistics, computer science, business studies and accounts. Similarly for the ECBA. So something is common here. It's about the subjects. Again, as we have seen the examples of the birds and animals, some of the characteristics are common. That's why see here, user-defined data type that contain data members and the objects. What are the data members? Data members are the variables like the name of the student, age of the student, height of the student, etc., etc. What's an object? Object is here the object is the student. In the first year, even though it was C++, when we talk about the C++, main importance is given to the objects. But in the first year, we have not created any objects. It was just equivalent to C language. This year, in all the programs, we are going to create the objects, and the syntax of creating the object is somewhat different. Now, one by one, we shall see. But before that, let us just recall the same. It's a user-defined data type that contain data members and the objects. Objects are having similar characteristics. Just now we have gone through the example, that is the subjects. Subjects are the common. Again, if you consider the examples of the class animals and the class birds, here also something will be common in animals, or when you consider the example of the class birds. One more definition for the same will be, the class is a way of grouping objects having similar characteristics. Here also we have some syntax, just like we had the syntax for the function. We shall see that. It starts with the keyword class, then user defined name, open the bracket, private, colon, data member, member function. Or instead of writing data member, we can write member data. One and the same. Similarly, public colon member data, member function. Then below that, protected, again column, member data, member function. Function. Close the bracket, semicolon. These are called as access specifiers. Then what are these access specifiers? These are giving security to the data. In the first year, we have not made use of these public, private and protected. In first year, we had a concept called as structure. Structure is somewhat similar to the objects, but there is a difference in the sense, in that case, whenever we created a structure variable, everything was public there, that we have here. Now, let us look into that later on. Let us come back to the syntax. It starts with the keyword class, user defined name, any name that we can give it to the class, then opening flower bracket, private, member data, member function. There is no, you need not have a semicolon here, but here it is colon, which is compulsory. Again, public, colon, same thing, member data, member function. Then comes protected, colon, member data, member function, close that, semicolon. This is how a class is defined. Now, what is this member data and what is this member function? Member data is the variable that we used right earlier. So it defines the characteristic like age, height, name, etc., etc. Then comes the member function. Member functions are the functions itself, which will do some particular task, or it will have some operation in it. It may be just like the addition of something, subtraction of something, multiplication, average, etc., etc. But it's a function. But what are these? How it's different from one another? Now coming to the private, see here it's a class, user defined name. We can give a name to a class. Just like in a college, there are different classes. Every class will be having its own name, right? So here also we are giving different names to the different classes. In one program, we can have any number of classes. It's not compulsory that we should have only one class. So every class will be having its own name. So if you have different classes, every class should have a different name, otherwise we will get error. Coming to this private and public. What is the difference between the private and public? In general or in real life, we know. If something is private, a private vehicle, only we can use it, others cannot use it. Public vehicles, just like the bus, anyone can travel in that, right? So here the difference between private and public, in the sense, if you have declared a variable here, member data, under private, we can write integer a here, and under public integer b. Then integer b becomes public, integer a becomes private to this. Then what is the difference? If you have declared something as private, that member data or member function becomes private to this class only. Only inside this particular class we can use it. Outside this class, whatever we have declared it as private is not accessible. We cannot get that particular variable. But if we declare some member data or member function under public, then inside the class, also outside the class, we can access those member data and member function. That's the main difference. Then comes the protected. When we talk about the protected, this protected is somewhat similar to the private. Inside the class, we can access it, but there is something different. Also, there is something called as friend functions. Friend functions. Friend function is a function which is written outside this class. Just like our friend can come to our house. He can come, he is allowed because he is our friend. Similarly, there is a concept called as friend function which we will have in other classes. We shall deal with that friend class later on, but for the time being, just remember that there is something called as friend function which is not a member of this particular class, but even that friend can access this protected. Also, we have the functions derived from this class can be accessed. Again, class, user defined name, open the flower bracket, private colon member data member function, public colon member data member function, protected colon member data member function, close the flower bracket, semicolon. Private and public, if you declare a particular data or function as private, that data or function can be accessible or accessed only within this particular class. Outside we cannot get those data and function. If you declare it under public, inside the class as well as outside the class we can access it. If you declare a data or function as protected, it's just like our private. Inside the class we can access. Also the friend functions and the functions derived from this class can access those data and function which are declared as protected. We shall come to the protected later on. For the time being, it's enough if you remember this much. Let us go to a simple example. When you talk about an account in a bank, which are the variables that we can have? The variables that we can have are, one is account number, name, our name, then account type like SB, FD, RD, etc. Then the balance. Account number, we know that it's integer. Name is character, it's not a single character, it's having some characters in it, so we shall declare it as an array of characters. Account type, again we shall take it as character like SB, FD, etc. So 2 characters in it. Then the balance, which can be float. We shall declare it under private. Then comes 2 functions. One is to input. The second one is display. In the form of a class, we shall write this. So when we talk about the class, it starts with the keyword class. Let us give a name to the class. Let it be account. Then open the floor bracket. Declare the variables under private. Which are those? Integer. Same thing. Account number, character name, character type, then balance in the account. Then we shall write public here, return type void input. This is declaration of the function void input, then void display. Then close it, semicolon. Now the question is, why we should write a void? Every function should have a return type. So when we are going to initially, even though we have declared these variables here, these variables should have some value. So we will input the value of the account number. Account should have a number, a name, whether it's SB or FD, then the balance in it. So whatever value we are going to deposit initially, that will be the balance. Later it will change, either based on the deposit or withdrawal. If it is a deposit, that will be added to the balance. If it is a withdrawal, that will be deducted from the balance. So we need to input those values. So this function we have to write. Every function should have a return type. Here we are inputting the value, we are not returning any value. That's why it's void. Then comes the display. It's not enough if you just input the value. We have to display it. Otherwise it's of no use unless we display that. So return type, function, then the bracket. Every function, what is the difference between the function and a variable? Variable is just the name, but whatever the function will be represented by function name and the brackets, opening and closing circular brackets. It's not flower bracket here. Then close that and semicolon. One thing that you can note here, we have declared the variables under private and the functions under public. Usually it will be written like this, because if you declare a particular function under private, outside the class we cannot make use of it. So if you declare a function here, you will get error message. Remember, always in most of the cases we will declare all the variables under the access specifier private and all the functions under access specifier public. Protected for the time being, we are not making use of. And one more thing, access specifier, suppose we forgot to write this here, what will happen? By default, everything, if you do not specify the access specifier, that will be taken as private. So you won't get error message. But for the functions, we need to write the public, otherwise it's not accessible outside the class. Hope the concept is clear. We shall continue this one in the next class.